Hello YouTube. I want to talk about Barsa Kelmes today and another island not far away, and we're speaking about two islands which are located in the Aral Sea. And this island, Barsa Kelmes, once was better known under the name of Sujuk. It's a very interesting place, and there is a catch to the whole story that I'll tell you, but I'll get to it afterwards, and I will bring up some more interesting, more recent information. But anyway, the Aral Sea, Aral in Kazakh means island, and it's located in the lowlands and is bordered by Kazakhstan to the north, Uzbekistan to the south. Very interesting territory. The Aral Sea itself, it's a dull sea, but it's smooth as mirror, and its waters are amazingly blue-colored ones. Once upon a time, there were more than 1,000 islands in the Aral Sea. Numerous lagoons, shallow straits. It was beautiful. But under the Soviet regime, with all its idiotic industrialization and agricultural undertakings, what happened is that the salinity of the water increased, pollutants were spread, and the sea became involved in so-called desiccation. And since 1991, the local economy has virtually disappeared. There's poverty and mortality, and this land was once known as part of the Great Silk Road, and it connected Asia and Europe. In the sands in that area, you can find a lot of interesting stuff, and archaeologists do. So nowadays, the Aral Sea is divided into two separate water regions. There's a small southern water body in the south and the small Aral Sea to the north. In 1996, Barsa Kelmes, at the northern part of the large water body, formed a connecting bridge to the shoreline for the first time. So, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, some of the secret stories and rumors of this region became more widely known. But still, very few people in the West have ever heard about this strange island in the vanishing sea. Barsa Kelmes, when you translate it from the native language, means the land of no return. That's what it is. And there are interesting secrets related to it. For example, we know that in 2001, there was a very interesting publication in a Russian magazine, and the author of the letter that was sent to the magazine, Nikolai Azhogin from Siberia, heard the following story from his grandfather, who had served in Kazakhstan in 1940s in the escort forces, which were combat forces of various types, provided to protect other forces against enemy attacks. According to Azhogin, in 1949, a fishing boat was anchored near Barsa Kelmes, waiting for a storm to end. Two curious fishermen went ashore to explore the island and did not return. Their comrades followed, and upon returning described a strange ring-shaped cloud of fog, where both fishermen had vanished. This was reported to the authorities, and soon after that, a Soviet PO-2 craft approached the island. The pilots, they noticed the fog long before reaching Barsa Kelmes. A few kilometers before this island, the plane's engine started sputtering. Undaunted, the pilots flew straight into the cloud. The engine stalled, and the pilots were lucky enough to land in the shallow waters. Now, the escort forces were the next to arrive in Barsa Kelmes. They surrounded this anomalous zone. Dogs on very long leashes were dispatched into the fog, but upon reaching a certain boundary, the dogs would not return. Scientists from Moscow were later sent to the area to study this phenomenon. They were of the opinion that the round cloud contained thousands of tons of special water, the kind usually obtained by laboratories in milligram lots. But the water was in the periphery of the enigmatic cloud formation. So the substance contained inside the cloud could not be reproduced in Soviet labs, even in the milligram amounts. The density in the center of the matter inside the cloud formation had to be truly fantastic. The Soviets continued their research through the years and were justifiably intrigued. They went as far as to transport a trench digger and a tank to the island. The machine, they were sealed as much as possible, and various units of equipment were attached to the armor, and the driver was under orders to talk non-stop during the operation. Now the tank began its slow entry into the cloud. For safety reasons, a cable was attached to the trench digger. The driver talked on, described what he observed, but then he abruptly stopped. He was ordered to return immediately. "Why do I need to return?" he replied, full of deep, genuine curiosity. The trench digger quickly pulled the tank out of the zone. It was enveloped in a thick frost and the hatch was opened. Inside the military scientists found the driver's uniform undamaged, but no trace of his body was found. Before the experiment, the tank driver had cut his finger. They found a bandage inside one of the gloves, but now the blood was missing. The bandage was placed under powerful microscopes, but no trace of blood was detected. Now, in 1960, the town of Barsa Kelmes consisted of small panel houses. The two architectural exceptions were a local Soviet army unit's headquarters made of brick and a typical Cossack yurta, which is a transportable, collapsible dwelling that has served the nomads from ancient time up to the present day. They still do. I've seen them. Inside the yurta dwelling lived a very unique person by the name of Abdrazak. This Cossack man considered himself to be devoted because he was attracted to the cloud of fog. He asked his relatives to bring him to the island shortly after the appearance of the ring-shaped cloud formation and warned of the danger associated with moving inside the fog. Later, after learning of the plans to fence the zone, he pointed out to the military the best places for a watchtower. When the time came for him to be sent to the watchtower, Soviet scientists and officers drove to his yurta and he exited together with his translator, Captain Kudaibergen, because Abdrazak understood very little Russian. They all drove to the cloud, and the Kazakh man, together with his translator, climbed one of the towers. The Russians ascended the other tower. Obviously, this Kazakh man had seen something and reported it to someone, but no one on the island knew anything about it, with the exception of those who were on the towers and had the clearance. Well, there was one vision received supposedly by Abdrazak, which became widely known on Barsa Kelmes at the time. A seance took place on September 3rd, 1960. Abdrazak had a vision during the seance of the event dated April 12, 1961. It was not an easy thing for the man to describe the vision in his Kazakh language, because the ideas and things he saw did not at the time have any adequate expression even in the Russian language. The perceived event was flight of a human being in the celestial void. Well, the prediction came true, as the world came to know, on April 12th of the next year, 1961. Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet cosmonaut, became the first man to travel into space. As reported in Transitions Online on December 17, 2000, a leading magazine covering Eastern Europe and the former republics of the Soviet Union, an ancient burial ground was discovered in the area between Barsa Kelmes and Aral Island. In 1999, the burial ground was positioned under 13 meters of water, but the sea desiccated and the burial places rose to the surface. It is quite common to see fishing boats abandoned in the desert sands that used to be waters of that sea. But who were the people buried at the bottom of the sea? Perhaps they were Sacs tribesmen or nomadic Mongolian warriors of Genghis Khan. Perhaps the remains were even older than that. Now, those who study ancient Sumer would be intrigued to know that the Sumerian goddess Ishtar travels into the underworld, which was called the Land of No Return. Sumerian descent stories consistently contain the warning that no one should venture to the Land of No Return. Was this mysterious island located off the northwestern Aral Sea coast the gateway to the Sumerian underworld? I want to tell you something else. Most of the people who used to live on the shores of the Aral Sea were fishermen, many generations of them, and they carry memories of strange beings and eerie occurrences associated with this dying sea. There was a Russian journalist, Novozhilov, years ago, who talked with an old Cossack fisherman who told of his father and grandfather once fishing near Sudzhok, or Barsa Kelmes. Now they saw a huge rock lying high over the sea on the shore. A shaitan or devil hatched from the rock. It was as big as a calf, its wings bigger than a sail, its beak with teeth longer than the creature itself. So the frightened fishermen abandoned the stockfish they were preparing and storing in the uninhabited part of the island. The Kazakh fisherman Nurpes Bayjanov also told the journalist that in the winter of that year, an aul, which is a nomadic village, arrived in the island, but the following spring his father and grandfather could not find either humans or animals on Sudzhok, Barsa Kelmes. Only 3 abandoned yurtas remained. In one of them, the fisherman found the shaitan's corpse. The beast resembled a gigantic bat, except that it had a huge muzzle elongated like a bird's beak. The muzzle contained sharp, fang-like teeth bent forward. The tail was long and very thin. Bayjanov actually showed journalist Novozhilov a tooth that had belonged to the creature. The father gave the Kazakh fisherman this tooth before dying. This was a real tooth, according to the Russian journalist, but its shape was strange and size unusual. The tooth did not appear to have been in the ground for millions of years before somebody found it. It was shiny and smooth, it looked fresh and had no traces of fossilization. So the fisherman did not give the tooth away, but allowed Novozhilov to take a photograph of it. The journalist wrote that he sent the photograph to the Paleontological Museum, where the tooth was identified as belonging to a pteranodon, a large crested pterosaur, or flying reptile from the Cretaceous period. Pterosaurs were not birds and not dinosaurs. They were more like flying lizards, but were closely related to dinosaurs. The first pteranodon skull was found in 1876 in Kansas, and the creature had a rather unusual appearance. This light-boned animal had a wingspan of 23 feet or 7 meters, about the width of a house. But here's what I find odd. Though the pteranodon was a carnivore, it had no teeth. It ate fish, crabs, mollusks, insects, and it also was a scavenger. So, how could the museum identify the tooth as belonging to a pterosaur that possessed no teeth? So, does that mean that Novozhilov was exaggerating? Now, I'm of the opinion that someone at the museum possessed a sense of humor and played a joke on the journalist. On the other hand, the Soviets were afraid to draw attention to the sea for the reasons buried on the Vozrozhdeniye Island, and I'll talk about it, and probably issued secret instructions regarding information related to the paranormal phenomena observed in the area. So, 2 questions. Was there an instruction to discredit Novozhilov? And something I need to bring up. A Soviet science fiction writer claims to have invented stories about Barsa Kelmes. He published a novel, I believe, in late 1980s, and kept saying that whatever occurs on the island is his imagination, and he put it in a science fiction story. That would have been the end of it. However, I found out interesting information from through the years from people who lived on the island well before, and what they reported, and I'll share some with you. So that's something I don't find quite easy to understand. Why would they use this science fiction writer to discredit Barsa Kelmes? You see, he was asked by his scientist friends to look into the island because they had received a lot of interesting information. Okay, but let's get to the fisherman's story that I just told you about and the tooth. It's interesting that when I was looking for information about Barsa Kelmes in the West, I was able to find out the person who was in charge of the sanctuary, island sanctuary, Zaprov Sanctuary on the island in 1934. He was living in Australia in 2001. And he wrote me a very touching letter, I remember, and he was, I think, also an email. But today, I'm not sure if he's alive. Somehow he escaped from the Soviet Union, like many of us did in different times. Now, the Barsa Kelmes Nature Reserve was founded in 1939, and it still functions and contains a number of rare plant and animal species. And the Zaprov Sanctuary was on the island before then. By the way, the island is the home of the rarest hoofed animal in the world, the so-called kulan, which is like a wild donkey. So, rumors and stories circulating about Barsa Kelmes include missing time episodes. There's also a story of the expedition that had disappeared on the island in the 1930s. One member of the expedition made it to the settlement 3 months later. He was placed in psychiatric hospital because he insisted that he had spent only 3 days on Barsa Kelmes. He didn't know what happened to the rest of the expedition. This expedition itself probably remains one of the unsolved secrets from Stalin's times, Russia, if this expedition existed. So I tried to collect, before we go on to Vozrozhdeniye, which there is no question of what was happening on that island, some of the things that I collected notes on the island. It was mentioned in late 1980s, and maybe even before in the Soviet media, as, again, there were stories of the prehistoric animal that I described. Somebody talked about an incident with UFO landing and anomalous time spatial phenomena, which I already talked about. Officially, some of the stories are considered to be false and hoax. And Sergei Lukyanenko, this was the science fiction writer I told you about, he played a key role with this. But again, not everybody agrees that everything is clear-cut about the island. We know that in the 19th century, by the way, it was visited by a well-known Ukrainian personality, Taras Shevchenko, in the expedition. There was a scientific expedition led by Butakov. He recorded and made a few drawings of the island. Some other people, local people, say that there have been instances where after a long stay on the island, some people would exhibit blue skin, and this was usually after the night spent on the island. Also, there is information about the cemetery on the island. What's interesting or strange is that some of the graves look very fresh, so to say. So who is being buried on this basically island with no people, with no real population on it. Also, there are stories that during the Soviet times they had been investigating biological weapons on that island, and that's why, according to at least somebody named Antonov, writer, that Soviet prisoners were brought to the island. So maybe there are some strange animals too. One of the people that I've found out recollections said that his grandfather told him about this island and about joint research of military and scientists. And this is interesting, based on what I told you just a short while ago. Tractors and machines were sent to the island, to the fog, and they never came back. So he was asking if more people have this information. One of the students who was on the island in 1980, 1981, he said he found no UFOs, no monsters, nothing. Nobody heard about any strange radio stations or nature preserves. According to him, no one that he met. But there was only the legend about the family and the Aul that disappeared, that village that disappeared. He remembers that he saw Soviet transport airplanes which were going with troops towards Afghanistan, and that's what he found out. But he said that he knows that the military presence was on the island, next door island, 25-30 kilometers away, Vozrozhdeniye, because there were experiments being done on small and large cattle. Also in 1975, he says that he remembers there was a ship, cargo ship, full of small apes, and the storm brought it to Barsa Kelmes, and one of the apes was able to jump aboard, and he drowned. And in the local museum they had whatever was left from the ape that they found. They kept it, and it's interesting that Lukyanenko, again, who gave an interview about this island, that he said that he invented letters from the fishermen, but that was after his Moscow friends requested that he help them investigate mysteries of Barsa Kelmes. So even before his fake story, there was something that was going on that really interested people. This is interesting. In June of 2016, there were people with the Cossack National Geographic Society expedition on Barsa Kelmes, and they said that the road to the island was impressive. It was 6 hours on the even desert, which previously was the bottom of the sea. There wasn't any interesting they found on the island. They found an abandoned well and a building, of the central building, which is in a pretty good shape and looks like it was abandoned yesterday. But the island is deserted, according to them. They saw a graveyard in the area. Not too many crosses there, of course, considering the area. They saw an obelisk, a monument on the for Butakov, and that's it. But they said when they were on the island, the atmosphere was very gloomy. They wanted to get out as soon as possible, and after they left, they breathed with relief. And all of a sudden, one of the jeeps that they were driving was engulfed in fire. Okay, so maybe this was a coincidence that the grass underneath would light up. But why in that area? They're asking. They traveled more than 4,000 kilometers, and they had to get their jeep on fire there. And that person says he's giving his word of honor, and he says, don't go to that island. I don't advise anybody to go. Now, information from local people who lived quite a while in the last century, They said that after the war, there's a train station, Aral Sea, and during the nighttime, under heavy guards, there would be cargo trains that brought apes to the area, and the access to the station, it was always surrounded by law enforcement. So local people did not really have access because we were dealing with state secrets. And now the animals would be loaded on trucks and sent to the island, to the secret laboratory for experiments. In the morning, the echelon would disappear. So first they thought that the cargo trains would bring them bananas from friendly Africa, but that wasn't that. Something else was brought in. One person remembered, and this is correspondence pertaining to Barsa Kelmes that I've been collecting, and this is from 2018. One person remembers that in the Muinak during the war, they had a fish factory there. That's when at that time this was the coast of Aral. So his mother told him that the island has had a lot of bad stories from the fishermen, and this had to do that. She told him somewhere in 1970s. She never heard about this writer Lukyanenko at the time. I don't think he was a young boy at the time. So this person whose information was published in Russian media, he's saying that all he can say that people had disappeared there a long time ago without any trace, and there had a lot of snakes, vipers, and scorpions, and that the pressure on the brains and gloominess was incredible at the time. That's what he's saying. So that's about Barsa Kelmes. We still are not sure about that island, but the other island, the island of death, we do know about. There's an island in the Aral Sea located right in the middle of this dying body of water. Its Russian name is Vozrozhdeniye, meaning Renaissance in Russian, but it should be called the Isle of Death. In the late 1990s, Russian and Western publications reported that a secret Soviet facility for testing of the country's biological warfare program had functioned there from 1936 through 1992. These tests performed on Vozrozhdeniye included the use of anthrax, smallpox, and plague. Some actually involved open-air tests of anthrax. According to Ken Alibek, a highly placed Russian official who defected to the United States, the Soviets even made attempts to produce viral weapons with very bad diseases. I won't go into this. Alibek actually saw hundreds of monkeys on the island inhaling the bacteria and viruses. The animals pulled their chains and screamed in agony as they were dying. Now, as the USSR was in the final stages of its existence, the Soviets had transferred hundreds of tons of anthrax to the island from other secret facilities. The buried anthrax is separated from the mainland by a mere 2 kilometers of shallow water. As the Aral Sea shrinks, the island increases in size. American inspectors who have visited the island since 1995 have reported that some of the anthrax spores are still viable. So this is good that there is an oversight over this island, so no uninvited guests go there. I'm sure the Russians are involved and the Americans, because nobody wants to see the spread of any diseases. Environmental degradation in the Aral Sea region has caused a socio-economic crisis, and it could have led to a nightmare scenario if the deadly contamination spread from the island, because the newly exposed dry seabed and the sea itself may be contaminated by the runoffs from the former military base and biological weapons laboratory on Vozrozhdeniye. So we can be sure that governments of major nations, probably China as well, are very much aware and put blockades to anybody who wants to reach the island uninvited, like I said. But the Aral Sea itself, it's situated on the former Silk Highway, where strong currents of air are blowing from the west to the east. Violent sandstorms spread hundreds of thousands of tons of salt and sand, plus the deadly pesticide and toxic dusts. The aerosols are carried to the higher layers of the atmosphere and spread around the planet. And that's bad. For instance, pesticides from the Aral region have been found in the blood of penguins in the Antarctic. So, as you can see, this is a planet that's well interconnected. And it has very interesting areas, such as the island of Barsa Kelmes. If ever there is more confirmation, I'll tell you about it. But I hope you like my research. Please support it. I have links on how to do it in the description section, and I'll bring you more stories and more reports. Thank you.